I had a boss who always said, Monica, saw off the branch you're sitting on because it forces you to reach for the branch above you.
Welcome to Thought Sparks. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and enjoy.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thought Sparks podcast. I'm Rita McGrath, and I am just so excited to be welcoming Monica Nassif to this program. She is an entrepreneur, a career changer, which we'll talk about a little bit, and the person who invented one of my husband's all-time favorite products, Mrs. Meyer's Clean Day. So welcome, Monica.
I'm delighted to be here.
Me too.
So it's your husband's favorite product. I love that.
Yeah, right. Isn't that great?
That's awesome.
I was working at once upon a time with Procter & Gamble and talking about the invention of the Swiffer. And one of the things they said that completely surprised him when that product came out was that men would actually use it.
I can see that. It's a great product. Yeah.
So anyway, you have this terrific new book, which is coming out, which is not out in print yet, so I have to make do with the copy. It's called I Bottled My Mother, the Mrs. Meyer Story, Grit, Grime, and Growing a Business. What a great business title.
Thank you.
So let's start off with kind of your journey, because it hasn't been a straightforward one. It's got quite a few twists and turns.
Yes, I have a crazy quilt of career, believe me. I started out, my education was a Bachelor of Science in nursing. I was a nurse for 4 years and mostly in intensive care units. I was miscast for that role. So I went back and picked up my English degree because I've always loved writing. And then I was fortunate to land an internship at Dayton Hudson when I was 28. I was a very old intern, but I aced the writing test. And someone asked me a question about chemistry of all things during the internship. And I answered that correctly. How? I don't know, but I did. And then I started my career in retail, and I just loved it. I loved everything about retail, consumer product. I've always been kind of a design and product geek, and so it just kind of fit with what I was passionate about. Mm-hmm. From there, I worked at Dayton Hudson for several years. Then I started a marketing agency.
No, that's the parent company behind Target.
Correct. Yep. That's no longer exists. Yep. Right. Yeah. And so then I ran a marketing agency for 10 years, and most of our work was with products inside Target as well as Target. And then I had this Eureka moment about cleaning products could be reinvented. So I started Caldrea and Mrs. Meyer's. And that's how I got into this crazy business of cleaning.
How fun. So Mrs. Meyer's is an actual person, your actual mother.
My mom, she's still alive. She's still bossing me around.
As is only appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. And she's doing great. She still lives in our family home. She's super healthy and vibrant. And,
that's wonderful. So her name's Thelma?
Thelma Meyer, yep.
So what was she like? I mean, you were one of 9, as I understand it?
Yes, I'm the oldest girl of 9 children. She had 9 children in 10 years.
Wow.
I had twin brothers to start with. Then I was born, then 3 sisters, and then 3 brothers. And she ran the house, as she said, like a drill sergeant. You know, she said, if I didn't keep control, who would? So she was, a child of the Depression. So she reused, recycled, repurposed everything. So we were taught, she grew up on a farm, even though we didn't. And yet she kind of operated our house like we had chores, do your work before you play, eat 3 square meals, get outside. I always kind of called her the original Earth mother. She saved everything. She really believed in healthy food, physical fitness. And so I was blessed with a lot of gifts, if you will, as a child that I tried to incorporate in this brand as I built it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can see that. And I read an interview that someone did with your mother, and just to kind of give you a sense of her personality, she said in the interview, well, I shouldn't be saying this, but, I don't like waste. And so if you get, the can of Mrs. Meyer's cleaning product and you want to wash your hands, you don't have to squeeze it all the way. You can squeeze it to halfway and get enough of that. I thought that was just so charming.
That is my mother, without question, for sure. Yeah.
I thought that was great. So maybe start with where did you get the inspiration for this iconic brand?
So I had a consulting business in marketing, communications, and brand building for about 10 years. And I was honestly getting frustrated with that, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I was in a store in Atlanta for a client, And I have a Eureka moment, a real Eureka moment. I see all these cleaning products on this wooden pallet, and they're tipped over. They have these garish liquids. They have these triggers that look like guns. And I remember just staring at that going, wouldn't that be great if that was like Aveda? Aveda is a personal care brand based in Minneapolis. I know a lot about that company. And I just kept thinking, what if that was wonderful? That whole category of caring for your home was great. You didn't have to buy it. You wanted to buy it. So honestly, I couldn't get that out of my head. So I got on the plane. I wrote down this 1-page business plan. I still have it to this day about how this category could be completely reinvented. So that's how I got started in it. Then you stop sleeping at night like entrepreneurs do, wrote my business plan, got out of the agency business and started working on this business.
So you gave up a steady job to go?
I did give up a steady job. Yes, I did. Yep. I put it all on the line.
Well, and entrepreneurs get conflicting advice, right? Some of them are told, well, hang on to the day job, and then, nights and weekends, do your 5 to 9, as they like to say. And then when that's kind of getting ready to take off, then you go into it. And other people say, well, no, if you're going to make something new in the world happen, it has to be full-time. That's got to be what you are doing and only what you are doing. Where do you land on that?
Oh, I'm like all in. I'm all about all eggs in one basket and watch that basket. Because now you have to know yourself. This is how I operate. I'm kind of all in or all out. I'm not one to kind of dabble at the edges. And I think what I've seen for entrepreneurs who approach me about their business or what they want to do, the one who's dabble at the edges, they never really get off the ground because they're not committed. When you have your entire life savings and your second mortgage and credit cards on the razor's edge, you get really focused really fast.
Certain amount of motivation.
Your motivation is extremely high. And I tend to, operate like that, tend to be, sophisticated, motivated. And so that's the way I roll. Others don't. And I understand that too.
Well, there's room in the world for all kinds of businesses, but
for sure.
to create something that's truly meaningful, I do think you need, there needs to be somebody really driving it, and that's got to happen kind of full time.
For sure.
So you started initially with a higher end brand. Now, what also was interesting to me was previous to this, you'd kind of been in either the care world or the retail world or but sort of the intangible asset world. And now here you are, getting into physical things. I mean, that must have been a pretty steep learning curve.
Yeah. What was interesting was, when you're in the consulting world, it's kind of ephemeral. You kind of can bring a lot of experience to the party and make recommendations, but then all of a sudden you're making the product, which is very different than selling a service. Yeah. But I knew one thing. I had always been in sales. When you run an agency, you're always selling something. Mm-hmm. And then 2, we were really good at brand building. And I had learned from other clients what worked, what didn't work. And so I had a lot of experience building a brand. And plus I knew the consumer world. Now I didn't really know how to go into grocery stores, the Targets, the Walmarts of the world from a execution distribution. That was a steeper learning curve for me without question.
But making the actual product.
Making the product. So the first thing I did, this is how I got started. I thought, I don't know how to put liquids in bottles, but I knew Minneapolis was a rich town for that because of 3M, Ecolab, Minnetonka Inc., Aveda. So there were a lot of people here who knew how to do that. So I said to the guy who cut my hair, I said, hey, Mick, do you know anybody who knows how to put liquids in bottles? He goes, oh, I cut the hair of a fragrance consultant. I'll set you up with her. So that was a fortuitous meeting. So I go see her. And she kind of opens up this world to me about, okay, first you got to do this, and then that. So through her, I met a manufacturer, a contract filler, west of Minneapolis. And they used to do all the hair care for Redmond hair care products. Oh. So I finally made a connection with them. And I had this business plan, this PowerPoint, dummy bottles. I went out and showed her. And I'll never forget, she leaned back in her chair and she goes, you cracked the code. I've been waiting for someone to figure out this category. You did it. I'll help you.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was huge.
What a great story. I never knew there was an actual occupation called fillers.
Well, they're contract fillers. So I guess that's sort of inside lingo, but we called them our filler.
Uh-huh.
So she was a chemist by training, and she was a partner in this firm, and they too were just getting started. And she goes, I'll help you. I said, well, what do I do? I'm not a chemist. She goes, here's the names of 3 chemists. Call them. They'll help you because you got to get some formulas, right? So 2 people, they just thought I was like crazy. They didn't like, no, thank you. And then the 3rd one agreed to meet with me, and she became our head chemist. And she came out of the personal care industry. So she had a very sophisticated approach to creating liquids, and she brought that sophistication to home care, which I wanted. I wanted this to kind of be personal care for the home.
Oh, nice.
So that was awesome. I mean, she was great. So she created the formulas. We tested them. I used to, on Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings, we worked in their lab. She would create all these samples. We would put them in paper bags. I throw my 2 kids in the back of the car. We drive around to 25, 30 homes. I'm just like a pathetic beggar begging my friends to test the product. We'd get their feedback. We'd reformulate. And then until we were happy, then we had our formulations. Mm-hmm. So she taught me a lot about how to make this happen.
That's so interesting. And so you got the test. You got what you think is ready for prime time. What happens next?
So what happens next is, so at the same time, I'm raising money, which is extremely difficult to raise money for a consumer product. Now, remember, this was the year 2000. So this is one of the first tech booms. Mm-hmm. And people just, I'm mostly pitching to older men, and they just look at me like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
I wish I had your husband there.
He would get the code. Yeah. They don't get that you cracked the code. That's interesting.
No, they don't get that. They wouldn't even, if I even said that, they wouldn't understand. So it took me a while, but I finally found someone willing to invest. So we raised 2 rounds of angel investor. And so we got started making inventory. And then the first thing we did is I had the Caldrea brand, which you mentioned earlier was the high-end brand. Mm-hmm. And it's because I thought, well, if we start high, we can always go down. You can't defy retail. You can't defy gravity in retail and luxury brands. Mm-hmm. So we built up a network of sales agents for the Caldrea brand for across the United States. And that took about a year to get going. Then we started going to trade shows, New York Gift, Housewares, and set up a booth and, showcasing our products. So that was kind of the first step just to get the sales engine going.
And did you hire salespeople?
I was kind of the first one. And then eventually I hired a salesperson for Caldrea. And then she set up a network of all these rep groups. So we had 10 rep groups that, for example, Seattle, in the Seattle area, Texas, New York, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then we started going after the major markets. I'm a big believer in focusing on geographic areas so you can max out your visibility, max out your energy. And so we got that going for about a year and a half. And then I started to see, what? Someone's going to knock us off. I knew that 80% of all household cleaning products were sold at the mass level, at the Targets, the Whole Foods. And I thought, if we don't knock off ourselves, someone's going to. And I'm not about to let that happen. We worked too hard. We got a great concept. The customer was really resonating to our idea of you could clean your entire home in one fragrance. So I wanted to take advantage of where the real volume was when I came to this type of product.
Mm-hmm. And your mom also had a role to play in that, as I understand it.
She did. I brought her the Caldrea, and while she loved it, she goes, "Oh, I could never afford this. You need to make something for me." And I kind of, I kind of listened, but then again, I was so busy. I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I kind of thought, man, we got to get to mass. And I didn't think Caldrea was positioned correctly. I thought it was too fancy, too European. Mm-hmm. The fragrances were probably a little ahead of the consumer. And so we said, let's knock ourselves off. Mm-hmm. I had a boss who always said, Monica, saw off the branch you're sitting on because it forces you to reach for the branch above you. And I never forgot that saying. And so I think, okay, I'm sitting on this branch. I'm getting ready to get the saw. Mm-hmm. So we thought, all right, if we're going to knock out Caldrea, what would we do? Mm-hmm. Well, we would bring in a whole new design team. So we brought in a whole new design team, and we started talking about
almost like a little separate company.
Believe me, very little. Probably me and another person, because we were quite small at the time. And we were just brainstorming about what this new brand should be. It should be earnest, hardworking, Midwestern values, kind of like fragrances out of a garden that everyone would recognize. And then it was just like, hey, this is kind of like my mom. She's a big gardener. So that's where the genesis of the name came from. So then I called my mom. I say, hey, Mom, I told her what I was doing. And of course, she's in the garden. And her first comment is, sure would be nice if you were down here to help pull weeds. Her love language is doing chores. That's her love language. And I wasn't there to do them. So anyway, I said, Mom, we're going to do this. And would you be willing to be a brand? And she goes, what's a brand? That was her first question. I said, I'll explain it later. Just say yes, because we got to get going, because we had to get this packaging ready for a trade show. So that was the genesis of the Mrs. Meyer's brand. That's how we got started.
But she's been a fabulous spokesperson for the brand.
She thinks she is star of stage and screen. Let me tell you, she loves it. And this book, oh my gosh, I've given her a reason to live. She is promoting this book like better than I am, quite honestly.
So for those of you just joining us, my guest is Monica Nassif, and her forthcoming book is called I Bottled My Mother. It's so forthcoming, I don't even have a physical copy.
Oh, here, I just got one, and I'm going to mail you one.
Excellent. So, by the way, on Brent, right? And so the book comes out around April 28th.
Yeah.
So please, those of you who are watching this, go get it. It promises to be a really fun read. So, and so this whole idea of cannibalizing yourself, coming up with the mass brand. So you've got the name now, you've got the formulation, you've got the thing that's working. How do you now begin to really think about building something of considerable substance? Because that's going to take investment, and it's going to take
work,
right?
Right. So the first customer we had for Mrs. Meyer's was Restoration Hardware. Now, this is a long time ago. This is when Restoration Hardware was kind of a hardware store. And they had all upscale, tools for gardening and all kinds of things. And the buyer loved the packaging. So he brought us in. And then one of our first goals was to get into all the Whole Foods stores. So back in the day, all the Whole Foods stores bought by region. There were 6 regions. You didn't go to corporate headquarters in Austin. So we picked off all those stores region by region. And we, again, went back to let's conquer New York, then Atlanta, then Miami, San Francisco. So every major market. And interesting enough, even though I'm from the Midwest, that was our last district, because they were just like, I don't get this. I don't understand the concept, even though we were performing quite well in the major markets. So we're doing well there. So that was our first order of business. And then the second thing we did is, and this was a mistake, we learned rather quickly, we went into Target. And so it was a little premature to go into Target. We did a 250 store test, and we couldn't control where the test stores were, so we didn't have any critical mass in any of our markets. So then that way we were in Target, and I know from working at Target that, you have a sales hurdle rate that you have to have so many bottles flying off the shelf per week. Well, we weren't even close to that. So I decided to kick ourselves out before they kicked us out.
Okay.
So I said, hey, we're not working. I can see the numbers. You can see the numbers. We have work to do. So we're going to go back, get our other distribution in order, and then we'll come back when we're ready.
Well, and just comment on that just for a sec. One of the things I really admire about entrepreneurs like yourself is being able to say, we tried this thing, it didn't work, but you also preserve your optionality. Like kicking yourself out before you got kicked out is a totally different sort of psychological construct than if they kicked you out and then you had to go crawling back later, right? To say, hey, this isn't working, let's stop it. But it kind of leaves the door open to the relationship once you figure out what you need to do to get it to work. And just for entrepreneurs listening to this, that's such a critical kind of thing, because a lot of people who sort of are brought up in corporate land, if something like that didn't work, they'd sort of hide it and
Yeah.
hope nobody noticed, right? And that's just the wrong way to do it, because
Oh, for sure.
something new, you're not going to have all the answers.
No, and entrepreneurs are exposed. From day one, you're exposed to investors, customers. And so you're used to being exposed, and slinking away doesn't do anything.
No.
And what it does says to the buyer is, oh, she knows what's going down.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a lot more respect for you.
Yeah.
So what I did over the next 2 years is I never asked for another order. I would go in and say, I just want to provide an update.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd go in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, say, here's where we are. And then I'd leave. And because I wanted to create desire for the brand. That's the other thing. I learned long ago in marketing, everybody wants what they can't have. And so if you can kind of say, hey, we're doing well. So then once we had greater distribution, then we became more desirable to target to come back in, and you have a little more negotiating power. But if you slink away, it's never good.
No. And I think a lot of people just haven't learned that lesson. And it kind of goes back to your upbringing, right? Which is, okay, that didn't work. If you're on a farm, right? Away from a problem does not make the problem better.
No, my mom had a saying, failure was not in my vocabulary. She said that, I just thought that was learning. She always said, okay, now we know. It was never, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. Mm-hmm. It was, okay, now we know. Next. It was just, on to the next thing. And so I kind of took that same approach to entrepreneurship, because trust me, every day something's not working. Every day. So you got to get used to it and take action accordingly.
So you get to Whole Foods, you got Restoration Hard Forward. What did you do over the next couple of years?
So then the next couple of years is we maxed out all the major markets. So every upscale grocery store in San Francisco, LA, Texas was a great market for us, Dallas, Houston. So we really exploited, and we started kind of testing distributors, because at the time, how we made this work was most distributors would not take us on. Why? We're too new. We have no promotional dollars. We don't even know how to, pay for store shelf or promos. We were quite ignorant. I'll just speak for myself. I was quite ignorant. I didn't even realize how that worked. Mm-hmm. So what we did is we invested instead on-ground merchandisers, which were our employees. So we had them sprinkled throughout the United States, and it was a big a capital investment. But we thought, hey, what's critical in retail and getting a product to the shelf? I always say the last mile, right? So that box of products has to get off that truck and get on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we were doing, which was quite different, was we wanted our products brand blocked. And what does that mean? So if you're in a cleaning section, we wanted all of our cleaning products stacked together. Wow. We did not want window spray with, Windex, Dawn, dish was Dawn, scattershot. We wanted it like beauty products, right? Mm-hmm. They do everything together, and they create this real estate statement. Well, trust me, no one at the store level is not going to do it. First of all, they don't have time. And second of all, the planogram isn't set up that way. And a planogram is a schematic of how these products should show up at shelf. Mm-hmm. So our merchandisers would meet the product at the back door. We drop ship to the stores, believe it or not. And then, because beauty products have done that for years. Mm-hmm. So they would pick up the product and then stock the shelves. Mm-hmm. That was huge, because we had to be brand blocked to create this statement because our prices were higher. But the bigger idea was that was our concept. You could clean across entire categories for your home: window, dish, laundry, hand care, all in one fragrance. And the customer loved it. So we had to be together. And we walked away from a lot of orders who refused to brand block us. Mm-hmm. Again, I knew we wouldn't sell. We would get kicked out.
So let's emphasize that again for our young entrepreneurs who might be listening. The ability and the confidence to say no to the things that are not in line with your vision is so critical. Again, because you've got scarce resources, and your time and energy is one of them. So, one of the things I do see entrepreneurs do that is quite a mistake is, they think any order is a good order, and that's not true.
No, I have learned that the hard way. Believe me. Once one of the ways that we funded our growth was we had an incredible private label program with Williams-Sonoma. And a lot of people thought, and very early in our company's history, and a lot of people, even several of my board members, said, "You're crazy. You should not be doing private label." And I went, we have to. Why? For one thing, it validates the category. If Williams-Sonoma creates this category of upscale cleaning products with upscale prices that are comparable to ours, they're better at marketing than we are. They have more dollars. They had 250 stores at the time. Online shopping was, just kind of getting started. So not only did we have cash flow, but we had validation for the concept. But then, so once
but also thinking 2 steps ahead, which is once your thing starts to take off, they're going to notice. Right?
Oh, exactly.
And then they're no dummies. I mean, if they see that there's a huge category just emerging, they're going to go in there. So you may as well sort of head them off at the pass, which I think is brilliant.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is, too, I negotiated a margin point to have our name on the back of the bottle created by the Caldrea company, because I wanted validation of the product and the concept that we honestly couldn't afford to do. And so that was huge. But then again, as we were discussing earlier, then other people came out of the woodwork to have us do private label. And I'm like, no. Sure, it would have been great cash flow, but lousy margin for retailers that made no sense to our market position. So you do have to learn to say no. It's hard though, because sometimes you're desperate. I've been there. I've taken orders I probably shouldn't have done.
Well, when you got no cash in the bank and a payroll to meet, it's really hard.
Yeah,
away from
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, I've been there. Believe me.
Yeah. So, so you've got the sort of private label distribution. You've got the upscale grocery stores. Did you finally get into Target? You did, didn't
yes,
you?
we did. About 2 years later, we got back into Target. And again, we started off slow. But this time, we were able to be more selective with the stores. So we could do the stores in markets where we had great presence. Because if you're a consumer and you see it at Whole Foods, and you see it at Target, and then you see it at Kowalski's, which is a great grocery store in the Minneapolis area, you start to see the brand. And so we wanted that. And so, yeah, we started to perform, and we got a lot more notoriety with the media. We had a little more cash flow. So we really started to, Mrs. Meyer's quickly became our rocket ship without question.
I love that. And then the other thing that I think is interesting, and then it's sort of a reflection of Target's comings and goings at that time, which I guess would be the mid-O's.
Yeah.
Target was the thing, right? And they had the little dog on the Times Square thing, and their whole brand at that time, and it was pretty disciplined, was, the things that you could buy at an upscale store, but at a price that makes sense, hence the Target price, right? And I thought it was so interesting to me, their history, because they came out of Marshall Fields.
Right.
And one of their Marshall Fields execs said, I think there's a room in the market for a thing that isn't a department store, but has sort of department store vibes, but at a much more of a mass market kind of price. And eventually Marshall Fields disappeared and Target kind of took over. And they now have kind of lost their way a bit, I think. I mean, I used to go there all the time, and I don't think I've been to Target in a while. So it was interesting to me that this moment that you were there was also a moment that they were really in the zeitgeist, as it were.
Oh, totally agree. Yeah, without question. Yeah. I think they're trying to figure their way back. I do.
Yeah. And I don't mean any criticism. I think.
Oh, no. I
sustain that in the face of lots of competition, and people will come after you, and they see what you're doing and it works, and so now you do something different.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're growing the brand. Presumably, you're paying back your investors. You're on that kind of slope of things are going well, but you're also working 14-hour days, and there's life to be lived and everything. What was that period like?
Life to be lived. Oh boy, Rita. I think the life to be lived was living in a plane and working a lot, without question. Without question. We had 2 daughters at the time. They were 10 and 12 when we started, and now they're really in the middle of their careers. They're doing quite well. And so I was very fortunate that my husband was a stay-at-home dad with the girls, and he was also my finance guy. So I had somebody I could really trust with the books. And he was really good at that. He had been a general manager at a small business before, so that was really his skill set. And then, honestly, it was chaotic. I traveled so much. I think it was said to me, we used to have a mommy who looked just like you. I often worried that, you just can't have it both ways. That's just kind of how I landed. I didn't like being gone so much, but at the same time, I had an obligation.
Yeah.
I was the income earner in our family, and I wanted to take care of my family. And this thing was growing like crazy. And I'm a true believer is when the wind is on your back, you got to run, because it doesn't happen that often.
No, no. My daughter used to say things like, "Other people's mothers don't need to be in China," during the time.
Right.
I mean, the guilt is just unbelievable. And
It's hard, isn't it?
yeah, and you've got girls, and they know how to twist the knife.
Oh yeah,
That's a unique skill set.
they know how to do it.
So our daughter went to Barnard College, a women's college here in New York, and they had this big moment when I think it was Gloria Steinem and Oprah Winfrey were coming, and you in person, and to get to be part of the audience, you had to write an essay. And her essay was actually about what it was like growing up with a working mother, and like all is forgiven. It was great.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I see my daughters both working full time. They both have two children. Their kids are right, 4 and 6, and I think they have a lot more appreciation for what we were trying to juggle without.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, when I was when my kids were little, there was this incredible schism, which I think has now softened a lot between the stay-at-home moms and the working moms. Right. And so my strategy to sort of make peace with the stay-at-home moms was I would be like, oh, you need photocopies for the PTA. I can do that at work, or whatever it was. You figure out the trade-offs.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll never forget going to one of the conferences, and they said, "Oh, why are you here? You're never here. And tell me again why you work so much." I'll never forget that as long as I live. And here's a full-time working teacher,
right?
Asking me this question.
I know. It's hard to navigate, but I think the good news is for women anyway. We have a lot more choices than I certainly had starting my career. So I started in you remember Alcott and Evans? It was this women's suit maker. Then they had the big shoulders.
The big shoulder pads of the 80s.
Alcott and Edwards, I think it was called, something like that. And you wore your sneakers to work, and you had your patent leather shoes and your jet wear, and it was like such an 80s thing. It was just
totally. Well, the other thing that I see, when my husband was a stay-at-home dad, he was like an exotic bird. He would take the girls to the playground, and the other women would just stand to the side and, kind of talk about him and never engage. And then the one time they invited him over for coffee, a little boy runs up and bites Calla's finger and draws blood. And and no one was talking to him. He's like, forget this. He just turns around the stroller and he goes, I'm fine without any coffee groups or what. I think that's changed though. I see a lot more stay-at-home dads, which is awesome.
Yeah. And I think it's nice. I mean, it's all about choices, right? And the other thing I think that our society got itself into is this notion that, the way I like to joke about it is, we built things around a male life cycle. Mm-hmm. The way it works is, in your 20s, you sort of start off in your ambition, you're figuring out what you want to do. And in your 30s, you kind of get sorted into high potentials and everybody else. In your 40s, you're climbing the ladder, you're assuming the webs of power. In your 50s, you're allowed one blonde and a Corvette. And then in your 60s, you sort of pass the world off.
Right.
Doesn't work for women.
What is that? So walk me through women. Come on.
So I think women, women who accomplish things in life. So women, 20s, kind of the same.
Yeah.
30s, if you decide that you're having a family or you happen to be having a family, now you're doing the juggle. Right. And I think you need to give yourself some grace and some breathing room. Find support, find a working dad, find something. You can't do 2 full-time jobs. Raising a human is a full-time job for somebody, and starting a business is a full-time job for somebody. By your 40s, you kind of got this down to sort of a rhythm. And by that time, typically you're dealing with teenagers. And as Anne Marie Slaughter has very famously written about, That's the hardest part. Like
Oh, yeah.
everybody thinks the babies are the hard part. No, 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 no.
No.
It's those teenage years where, and as your mom would probably have said, an authority presence is necessary.
Exactly.
Then once the kids are sort of exit stage left, or pretty close to being exit stage left, typically if you're married, your husband's exhausted by then. And he's kind of ready to like not be the go, 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 go anymore. And so women in their 50s, I've said this for years, women in their 50s and 60s will astonish you, right? Because they're not worried about the meaning of life. They've figured this out, where a lot of their male colleagues who have worked so hard have not done that. You've brought human beings into the world, that job's done. And now you can really go forward. And a lot of times at that point, the guys don't require a whole lot of maintenance. And so I think it's a really different pattern for women.
Oh, that's so true. I never thought of it that way. It's super. I think you're so right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think we still have these stereotypes about what should you be doing in your 30s. And you can't both work all the time at anything and expect to have some kind of, I think you have to give yourself a way to get some breathing room, however you manage it. Anyway, so you get to go through the O's, working like a dog, making peace with your suburban stay-at-home friends. And then you come to this pretty momentous decision to think about selling the company. So talk about that, because a lot of entrepreneurs, that's a fever dream for them. They would love that.
Well, it's bittersweet. I'm just going to be really honest. You have this dream, but at the same time, the joy for me was building. I love a good challenge. I love the chase scene in a movie. Mm-hmm. And when you sell, you kind of go, oh man, the fun's over. Mm-hmm. And it's your mother. And I knew someone would acquire us because the first year we showed up at the Houseware Show in Chicago, we had this tiny little booth, this gorgeous armoire with all the Caldrea products. We looked so different than any other cleaning brand. And in walks a team from S.E. Johnson. And honestly, I couldn't get them out of our booth. And they're really into fragrance because of their Glade business. Mm-hmm. And they know a ton about cleaning. They're experts in it, right? They have so many mass products that have done so well. Mm-hmm. And so I knew they had been kind of snooping around for years. And then we were approached by countless private equity, countless VC people. And I always asked them the same question, and I never got an interesting answer. And that is, what can you do for us that we can't do for ourselves? Mm-hmm. But I just was even waiting for a bucket of money. I mean, something kind of compelling. Mm-hmm. And it was always like, we'll be your partner. And then we'd talk a little bit. And I thought, these guys aren't that interesting. They don't get how to build a brand. I wanted a partner who thought, oh my gosh, this has global potential. Because I felt like the assets of the brand were rich enough and could really stand the test of time. When times are good, when times are bad, could really scale. And I thought SEJ could do that. Mm-hmm. And I think they've done that. Mm-hmm. But it's hard. I'm not saying this is an easy decision. It's
So can you walk us through sort of so people are approaching you, so that's one possible path?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, so people are approaching us. I kept track of every phone call, every connection. Mm-hmm. We talked to a lot of private equity person about maybe starting there before we sold to a strategic. And I honestly didn't feel like there was a fit with anyone who approached us. Now, maybe it would be different, with different private equity firms at the party, but I just felt like that wasn't an avenue for us. So the other thing we did was kind of get our house in order, and what do I mean by that? Well, they love 3 years of audited financial statements. So we tried to clean up our inventory. We hired an operations person to come in and kind of, really assess our operations. And so once someone did come in, we had a lot of the issues that we were, which are typical in a small company, that they were on their path to sort of resolution, if you will. So we did a lot of cleanup too before we did that.
But the desire to sell, was it to create more space for yourself, to give the brand more headroom?
It was that, to give brand, and also to take advantage of the moment. And what was happening when we sold was organic food brands were being gobbled up. Organic personal care brands were being gobbled up. So we were next. I just knew it because that was kind of the evolution of the whole category. And that was the trend I saw when I started the company. This new consumer was eating healthy, organic milk, organic food. Well, then she said, wait a minute, I got to make sure all the personal care products I'm putting all over my body are safe for me and my kids. So it was just a matter of time before cleaning had to step in and do that too. And so I saw that happening from the acquisition standpoint with the multiples high. So that was one thing. And then two, honestly, you kind of get to a point, I'll speak for myself, where you go, man, how long can I do this? You know, you start to go, this might be exceeding my skill level, you know.
Mhm.
You know, you have to be honest with yourself.
So interesting. You know, one of the women entrepreneurs I really admire is Maxine Clark, who founded Build-A-Bear Workshop.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you know about them. And you know, again, beloved brand, a fixture in the malls. Her business model, by the way, is sheer genius. She gets parents to shell out upwards of $100 to provide the free labor that creates her product. I mean, genius.
Yes.
But, you know, an entrepreneur got the company going, had the brilliant concept, got it started. And then it just got to a point where it sort of outgrew her. And so my friend Sharon Price John was brought in. She's a corporate person, you know, had been at Stride Right and Barbie and, you know, had done all the kind of things you need to do to scale a company.
Yeah.
But think about the interesting interpersonal challenge, right? So she's got to come into this beloved brand with this beloved CEO and get it to where it needs to be healthy without destroying human relationships. And I think she's done a fabulous job.
Yeah.
So it's a similar sort of story.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. It's you second guess yourself. Yeah, it's you know, because I was 53 when I left, and I had a lot of gas in my tank. You know, I still kind of do, and yeah.
So tell me about life since then. What
So
what are you up to?
what am I doing now? So I'm on a board with Barkeeper's Friend. I know a lot about the category. They were just recently acquired by a private equity firm, Forward Consumer Partners, that's doing some interesting things with brands. And then I've done a lot of writing, and I've done some public speaking, and so and I have 4 grandkids.
Oh.
So I've got enough going on, believe me. And then
it just sounds as though
with this book, so I always have to have a creative project, always, you know. My mother has a great line. She says, for us, rest is a sort of punishment.
That's wonderful.
That really describes our family quite well.
I bet my mom would have said the same thing. She was a microbiologist in an era when, you know, women didn't really do that. And here's an interesting sort of woman related thing. So her original goal, so she grew up in post World War II Germany. So, you know, economy in tatters, things weren't great. She assumed she would never marry because the men were all, you know, either gone or you know, disabled. And so she figured out she'd have to support herself somehow. And so she wanted to go into large animal husbandry and hit a brick wall, which is basically large, you know, women don't belong in this field. Da, 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 da.
Right.
And so she thought and said, well, hey, maybe I could take these skills. She was a very skilled scientist and very good mathematically and all that, and go somewhere else, and found the field of microbiology. Now, here was what was interesting. It was a brand new field. So it had not yet been colonized by the male of the species.
Good for her.
Good for her, right? And so she did her degree and PhD in Britain, in the UK, and published her thesis in 1955. And her research, it was on self-repairing DNA, and her research is still being cited today. So, I mean, just isn't that something? I just
a great role model, right?
Right?
Yeah.
And she would do things like when we moved to the suburbs, she would mow the lawn, and all the women in the neighborhood were like,
"Wait a minute,
what are you doing?" You know? So I think it was very consistent.
I love
there.
that. That's awesome.
So this is your third book, as I understand it.
Well, I wrote two cleaning books, which were really more marketing tools, if you will. When I had the Caldrea brand, spring cleaning, and what was the other one? Oh, laundry. And then we also did a book about cleaning. With my mom did it. Well, supposedly she had a ghostwriter. But this book, this is more of a passion project. I wrote this. A lot of people are like, "Did you write it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been a writer my entire career. I wrote this book." So this was really a love letter to my mother, thanking her for the inspiration, why she was the inspiration behind the brand, and then a how-to guide, a startup manual. Because when I talk to entrepreneurs, I get asked a lot of questions about how do I do this? And I think there's a better question. Should you be doing this?
Mm.
And then I also get the questions like, how are you so creative? Where do you get your ideas? So I share with, hey, you got to walk around, get away from your computer and your phone, put it down, take a walk through all the stores. Malls are kind of making a comeback. Well, why is that? Get out and walk around and figure it out.
Well,
So
there's a lot of theorizing right now that as the world digitizes, that the value of tangible, interpersonal, in real life things is going up. And as a strategist, I think that makes a lot of sense because digital is cheap, digital is plentiful, digital is no longer scarce. And so when something's valuable but readily available, the people's willingness to pay for it is zero.
Oh.
I mean, my example is always oxygen. Like, oxygen's essential. We couldn't live without it, but it's readily available, so you can't make money from that.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's great because it reminds me of when I started, the merchants of old, they spent all the time in the stores. Nobody was looking at their phone. They were walking stores, figuring out what's new, what's selling, what's interesting, what's not, who's executing well, who's not, I think that's all going to come back. What's probably happening now.
It probably is. It's interesting to think about what businesses would you start if that was your hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
And there's famous stories about Sam Walton. Like, he would be in the stores and he'd go across the street to the other grocery store. He'd look at their price of milk. He'd come to his own store, and God help the store manager if the Walmart price was higher than the one across the street.
Oh yeah,
it just sets such a role model, right?
Oh, when I called on Walmart, he's got a museum down there. I don't know if you've been in it, but it kind of brings tears to your eyes. It's so inspirational. What he thought about the consumer and how he thought about the back end of the business to be more efficient so he could lower those prices. And for anyone, if you're a retail geek, you got to walk through there. It's very inspiring.
Mm-hmm. So when you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, what are some of the mistakes that you see people making that people listening to this podcast don't have to make for themselves?
Probably the biggest one I see consistently is thinking too small.
Mm.
They'll bring me an idea that's just this tiny little tweak.
Mm-hmm.
And I always go, you know what? That's not going to be noticed. Target's not going to bring you in. And then the other thing is just the lack of research. They'll bring me this idea, they'll show it to me, and I go, oh gosh, have you been at Target lately? I just saw X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh no, I haven't gone to Target. Are you kidding me? You got to see where the action is. The action is in the store shelf. Right. Plus, you can also see, sure, you can go on Amazon or whatever, Walmart.com, and look at price positioning and all that stuff. But when you're looking at an entire category of goods and you can see a 16-foot section of, let's just pick on a category, car cleaning products, you can pick up pretty quickly who's got shelf space and who doesn't. And why is that? What's their price point? What's their packaging? What's their point of difference? And if you don't understand that and you're going into that category, I see that thinking too small, lack of research, and expecting me to give them all the answers. I'm like, hey, I don't have a lot of answers. I have a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And so I think if their dreams were bigger, that would help them, because you need to disrupt a category to be noticed. You're just not going to get any traction. And I always say, you're going into Target. Let's pick on Target for a second. Mm-hmm. Who is Target going to kick out for you? Just think, go to the store and I want you to stand at that store shelf and think about it. Who are they going to kick out for you?
I love that.
They're not, they're not going to add a wing on for your product. So who are you going to kick out? And you got to think about that. So when you go in and pitch your product to a Target buyer, you better have your margin right, your SRP right, your suggested retail price, and your point of difference. Mm-hmm. So I can help them think through that. So I see those two things. Mm-hmm. The other mistake I see is not having a thoughtful plan. Now, I'm not talking about a 42-page PowerPoint deck. I'm talking, hey, could you just have a compelling 2-page executive summary? Mm-hmm. That you can really share your story and maybe examples of other brands that have done this. Mm-hmm. When I was early on with my business plan, I found a gentleman to help me kind of rework my business plan to make it more appealing to investors. Mm-hmm. And I came up with one slide that I could see their eyes kind of widen, like, oh, now I get it. And that was comparing our category to someone else. Mm-hmm. And that was all the commodity categories were moving up market. dog food, shampoo, food, etc., coffee. So if you could show them, hey, it's just a matter of time before cleaning, they understand that. Especially if you disrupt a category, can you compare it to others to make your investors more comfortable with the concept? So that was a big thing.
I love that, and I think it's part. People always ask me like, well, how do I think more strategically? And what I think you're showing people is it's asking the next question, the next question, the next question, and I think a lot of people don't do that. They take the framing of the world the way it is, and by that framing, they don't think, well, what would I do that would change that world? The other thing I think people do that is oftentimes not so helpful for themselves is they don't see how the changes in one part of the world are going to spill over and change in another part of the world. So one of my favorite examples is fast fashion. So if you look at the rise of fast fashion, it really begins to take off in the early tech 2000s. Well, why is that? What's going on in that period of time? Well, cell phones are becoming a thing. And this was long before we had the smartphone, but we did have phones with cameras in them.
Yeah.
And who buys those? Well, teenagers buy those. And what do teenagers do once they're equipped with phones? Well, guess what? It's this stuff, right? They're taking pictures of each other and they're sending them around. And so your friend gets a picture of you on Monday and you're wearing a blue shirt, and then the same picture on Wednesday and you're still in the same blue shirt. And then it's Saturday and you're at a party and you're at blue shirt. Well, how lame is that? So you can actually draw a graph which shows the fate of department stores, which at the time was really struggling, and the rise of fast fashion. But I think the underlying causal mechanism was this desire to appear in what's almost disposable fashion. Right?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. I think
go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's right on. That's right on. But you're right. You have to understand all of that. It's sort of, I always tell people one thing: good entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, they're good at connecting the dots. This is kind of what you're talking about. But then you can't connect dots if you don't have any dots.
Right.
I always say that. So go get your dots. And what I mean by that is get off the computer and walk around. And I used to keep this Excel document, and I would have all these categories: movies, books, art museums, fashion, brands, whatever. And if I thought something was interesting, I'd put it on there. I still do this. I don't even know why. It's probably unnecessary, but it makes me feel better, I guess. And then I'd go, okay, what is going on here? Where's the red thread? And so if you're a good dot connector, you can kind of see where, I love the title of your book. You can kind of see around the corner. And that's what I think entrepreneurs are good at. They can, to your point earlier, they can kind of see around the corner because they have a lot of dots.
I love that concept. That is great. And you know what? Again, when I talk to a lot of corporate people, they say, these inflection points, they come out of nowhere and they just emerge. And I'm like, no, before you could have X, there had to be a whole series of things that happen. And it's a bit like the old Hemingway book novel, right? Where one character asks another, well, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer was, well, gradually. And then
and then rather quickly.
But I think what your story illustrates, and you alluded to it earlier, is you have to move when that moment is here, right?
Right. Or you got to run
too early. You want to take your time when it's just beginning to formulate. But when that moment presents itself, then you have to be able to act. And I see a lot of corporate types, especially freeze at that moment. It's obvious to everybody that XYZ is going to happen. And yet, we see it today. With the energy transition, right? We know that by 2050, we don't have 8 planets to burn. Something is going to have to shift. And yet everybody's, frozen.
Yeah, it's terrifying, actually. Yeah.
Right. So
and again, they have that constraint, of structure, board, financials, quarterly. When you're an entrepreneur, you don't have that. You got yourself and a little money to run, and so you're right. You got to kind of plot around small and with limited cash flow. But then when you see the window, I call it the lucky ladybug. When she shows up on your shoulder, go sign.
So I think one of the other things, and one of the real themes, I think, of your book, from what I can gather, is make the best you can with the resources that you've got. And I think one of the big myths about entrepreneurship is that, you have to get VC money and you have to have a roadmap to growing really, really fast. And you have to have this whole checklist of things. And I see so many really successful people create these businesses out of practically nothing, like yours, that then go and change the world. I mean, it's really interesting. So maybe elaborate a little on that theme.
Well, okay, I grew up with a mother who did make something out of nothing. She recycled. You could be grounded if you threw out her potato water, which would be used next week for soup. And she was this is what we need to talk about. She's a huge believer of working with your hands. She said creativity lies in your hands. And so she taught us to how to do a lot of stuff. I know it's so domestic, but cooking, sewing, gardening. Again, she thought that was super creative. If you know how to work with your hands, if you know how to fix stuff, you're going to get a lot further than other people. I just heard this great podcast of a guy who said, I bet if you gave MIT grads, they probably wouldn't know how to turn on a light bulb. We gave them just a few tools. And I thought, God, that's probably true. But here's my father, who was an engineer for John Deere. He could do anything with his hands. Why? He grew up like that on a farm in Kansas, And so that was a gift to us. We learned how to do all those domestic things, which actually teaches you how to be resourceful when you have nothing, when you're starting a business. You make do with what you got.
You absolutely do.
Yeah. That great movie, Apollo, Ed Harris, and they're stuck in space and they go, okay, we got to get these guys down. And they go in the back room, they pull out this box of stuff and they go, and they dump it on the table and they go, okay, this is all we got to get these guys down, to get these guys home. Remember that scene? It's awesome. That's what you're like as an entrepreneur. You got only this stuff on the table. Let's go.
Well, and the other thing I think that's true is you have a lot more resources than you think you have in many cases. Yeah. I mean, what I enjoyed about hearing sort of your story of how this brand came to be was, you didn't know how to fill bottles, so let's find out who might know that, right? And that person then might know somebody else, and that person might know somebody else. And one of the things I see entrepreneurs do is they create these networks of possibility.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And so nerdy guys staring at their phones are not, again, talking to people. You're not getting dots to connect.
Yeah. No, you got to ask. I mean, it's kind of like shameless cold calling. I mean, you got to just keep calling and calling and calling, and let's not forget at the time, LinkedIn did not exist. So it's very difficult to find people. And when I was out raising money, it took me 6 weeks to find this one gentleman. I was so desperate raising money that a friend of mine who belonged to this very wealthy congregation, he gave me his church directory. And he said, hey, Monica, just start calling down the list. So I did. I just started calling down the list. And then I finally ran into someone I knew, and she goes, oh, you got to find this guy. He was an original investor in the Nerf ball. He loves consumer product deals. You got to find him. He's here. So it took me forever. I took 6 weeks to find this guy. Finally tracked him down. He agreed to meet with me. He thoughtfully listens to my entire pitch. And he goes, okay, I just want you to know something, Monica. He goes, I hate consumer product deals. I just hate them. But you know what? I kind of like you. So he said, if I'm going to read this over the weekend, and if I like it, I'm going to call you Monday at 8 a.m. But if you don't hear from me, I'm not interested. Who calls me at 8 a.m. Monday? This guy. And he turned out to be one of my biggest champions and educators.
Wonderful.
Raise money. He was on my board. He was, as my mother said, a guardian angel, but he really helped me with a lot of things I didn't know how to do.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah. And those resources are out there if you're willing enough. But I do think a lot of people have sort of, as you said, they don't do their research. They don't really think through, what do I need to learn to get this thing to work, right?
Yeah. I mean, my attitude was, okay, I'm an English major. My MBA is from the School of Hard Knocks, from knocking my teeth out many times as I fall. But, I always said when I was lost, well, I can read. That was always my line when I didn't know something. I went, well, I can read. I can figure it out, or I can call someone,
So what do you think? Are English majors coming back now? Nobody's sending kids to code anymore.
Well, I think an English major is awesome because we can follow the plot, What are great brands? They're stories, right? They're authentic. The good stories are authentic. They're authoritative, and That's how I always thought of a great brand story. Even when we were creating brands for other people, they're stories.
Mhm. Oh, I love that. I just love that. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so
Great.
much for agreeing to join. So maybe hold up your book again.
I'm going to, yes.
Forthcoming book,
Mother.
Mother, which I think is one of the best book titles ever. And so my guest has been Monica Nassif. Thank you so much for joining me. I learned a lot. This was really fun.
Great, Rita. That was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.